Hi, I'm Melanie Hellier, committee member of Healthy Brandon and also garden coordinator of Hummingbird Community Garden. With me today is Justine Friesen, recreation programmer, Parks and Recreation with City of Brandon, and Blake Hamilton, who's our master composter and who will facilitate the class today. Behind the scenes is Quincy Longman, who's the program assistant, Parks and Recreation, City of Brandon. And together, the City of Brandon and Healthy Brandon are filming a series of gardening workshops to address the concerns that we hear about from our gardeners related to community garden. Today we're going to talk about, this is the second in our series, and today Blake is going to lead us through composting and soil additives. So Blake, where we have our garden space, we're ready to go, and then we hear something about composting and soil additives. Can you tell us what we need to know about those subjects?
Hi, I'm Blake Hamilton. I'm a master composter and coordinator of the New Era Friendship Garden, which we started here in 2009. And it's thriving very, very well. I'm also an ISA arborist for Hamilton Arboriculture. And between gardening and tree work, I spend a lot of time with plants, with soil, and with various soil amendments, which we're gonna go over today. Thanks to Healthy Brandon for putting this together, and to the City of Brandon for providing these spots where people can come together to grow gardens and enjoy each other's company, even while it's social distanced. So you don't need to be a wizard to make compost. You just need to know a couple things and be able to put in a little bit of elbow grease, or at least bribe somebody else to. The two main implements of destruction for manual composting is a garden fork, not to be confused with a pitchfork. Pitchforks can find their way into composting somehow, but mostly what you're going to want to be doing is pretty heavy digging and prying and turning. So a nice solid garden fork. And then a flat-headed shovel. And the reason for a flat-headed shovel is because this is your chopper. So you can take your towering poplar sapling there that's gonna get mowed anyways, and instead of just throwing it on whole, you just kind of go tuk, 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 tuk. And now this is gonna decompose a lot faster than it would have if it was, you get the idea. So this can be great. You can get maybe a stump or something on the ground quite low that you can chop, or you can just chop your plants up on the soil surface. So for instance, this mother's wort here, beautiful plant. Let's compost it. I'm just gonna set it down, give it a little choppy chop, make its profile a lot smaller. And there, throw it on there. Magic. Okay, it's not going to decompose like that. We're going to have to actually get into this pile. So this is like an archaeological dig, as well as turning the compost, because this pile has been sitting here for a while. Here's some of that thatch I'm talking about. Like, this stuff is just not going to be able to break down unless it's buried, unless it's like being pressed down by all the rest of the compost weight and moisture. Otherwise it's just going to act as a thatch. So we'll get this stuff maybe pulled out this way. It's a lot of quackgrass. And then I'll pull the whole pile in this way so that we get some of the stuff from the bottom on top. And then this grass will decompose. Okay, here's some things that really annoy people who deal with compost. Twine. If you can keep twine out of your garden and out of your life, that's better, because otherwise you're going to be trying to dig it out of your lawnmower, trying to dig it out of your whippersnipper, and trying to dig it out of your compost all the time. I'm just going to put it in my pocket. Some other things that get annoying in compost, well, there's just like, stuff that obviously shouldn't be in there, like tin cans. You get a lot of tags. A few, you don't mind, but it's just like, please get this stuff out of your compost. Little plant tags, little plant pots.
What about blue gloves? I see some blue gloves in there.
Yeah, and then the gloves. People like to put gloves onto gardens sometimes, keep their hands dirtless. Keep their fingernails without dirt. Well, it's garbage, and see what happens is everything's breaking down that's organic, and everything that's inorganic is just sitting there, and eventually, and you just slowly concentrate the inorganics until like everywhere you look there's garbage. So it's really important, because you're kind of concentrating by breaking everything down that isn't synthetic. You end up with like a lot of plastic showing, and it's just pretty gross. So not putting stuff in, oh, a little bit won't hurt, because it does add up. So let's keep going on this. We'll pull this back. Again, this is something that I got to be mindful of. Is there a lot of material coming up that I'm breathing? Looks pretty good. I don't think I'm making too much stuff come up, but be mindful of that. And if you do see a lot of dust and steam and spores, it's worth it to put a mask on.
It smells like fresh dirt. Is that a good smell?
Yeah, like this pile has been breaking down fairly well. It's a pretty nice mix just naturally from what's been going into the garden, from the garden. It tends to be a pretty good mix of greens and browns. There was a while when I was bagging the grass clippings and putting it on, and then we started to run into some issues where I hadn't mixed enough browns, and it did have more of a odor. And then, you know, you get people throwing a bunch of really gross kitchen scraps and cooked food away in like produce bags and stuff like that, and it doesn't take too much of that to make a funk. But this is a really nice mix. We got a lot of straw, and we had some straw bales in the garden at one point. See, very annoying. So
If you notice that the smell smells like fresh dirt, then we know that we've got good compost. And if you notice an odor that's a little bit...
yeah, it works out pretty good. If your compost smells like soil, you're doing all right. Okay. If it reeks, then you probably have too much nitrogen, or there's a pocket in there where there's not enough air getting at it, or it's too moist, too wet. So I'm just gonna break this up a little bit more. I'm gonna go over the surface, and then I'm thinking, see, like this thing is at the bottom and it looks perfectly good. That could have been in there for 8 years. Then I'm gonna grab the tiller, and I'm gonna use a garden tiller to kind of emulsify this a little bit more, and then we'll probably see this compost be usable by the spring of next year as a soil amendment. As long as I till it, turn it all, water it, and maybe give it another turn in the fall, because it is fairly well broken down. But mind you, this was a layer of see, even your browns, if they're not broken up, this could have been sitting in there for a long time. Yeah. And it just doesn't decompose because it holds too much air.
So my question is there a better time? Is spring better than fall to put your compost in, or do you do both? Or?
Yeah, you can do it. I would do it perpetually, because that way you're getting, you know, you're keeping up with things. You're giving everything that you create as a byproduct as much time as possible to decompose, because you're putting it in right away and not... I mean, the only other way to do it would be to dry stuff out and then like rehydrate it later. And so it's yeah, definitely better to have an ongoing composting project that you're kind of perpetually adding to, unless you're doing batches of like a hot compost. And I encourage you to look up thermophilic composting or hot composting on the Master Gardener website, and some of the other techniques there. Other people do have the plastic backyard jobbies that kind of look like a big black dome or Darth Vader's helmet. Those things work quite well, but they can get pretty soggy and pretty stinky, and they kind of prevent you from sort of knowing what's going on in there. Yeah. So I prefer like having a pile that's manageable and turnable. And you can sometimes, you know, you can put that on top of something impermeable, so you don't have quite as much moisture fall through if you're dealing with drier climates. You want to put your compost in the shade. Here it gets a lot of direct south sunlight, so it has a tendency to dry out, and it's also the furthest part of the garden from the water source, so it doesn't happen to get watered by anybody very often.
So you don't need a special container or
no.
Have it just as a pile like this. this if you wish.
Yeah, I mean, you keep in mind that there's going to be nutrients that are going to leach through the compost. And so, I mean, ideally, I would move this compost around on every 2 years or something. I'd put it in a different spot and I'd produce in the spot that it just was and use some nitrogen hungry plants to actually like utilize that nitrogen that had leached into the soil. So I'm not just always composting in the same spot and always leaching nutrients in the same spot that's not getting picked up by anything. So you kind of look at it like that too. You're not just producing nutrients and compost above the ground, you're putting nutrients inadvertently into the ground, and there's no real way to get around that unless you do something that I haven't learned about yet. So I mean, for me, I would be inclined to move my compost and plant some annuals behind it that are really leafy green nitrogen loving plants, so that I'm using up that nitrogen that went into the soil there.
So for using the compost, once it's all done, is it better to put your compost on spring or fall, or like you said, to perpetually add?
I think it depends a little bit on the plants. There's certain plants that like to be fed at different times of year. For instance, certain trees like their fertilizer hit in the spring, some like it in the fall. I would say probably before you plant would be the best, because if you put your compost on in the fall, there's a lot more time for the evaporation of nutrients. So like the nitrogen can evaporate, and other soil nutrients can kind of cook. Whereas if you put it on with your plants, that nutrients are available right then and there, and you haven't lost any through runoff or through evaporation. So I'm gonna keep on shoveling, getting through this.
What you did with the plow?
Yeah, I went through and kind of forked out a lot of the big kind of gobs of straw or other materials that had kind of formed a mass. Kind of broke down the aggregates and got some of the sticks and some more of the garbage out. And then I passed a rototiller through it about 6 times back and forth, and kind of worked it. I got down pretty low, but there's some material down there that I didn't get to. But what it did is it really emulsified the pile, and it broke up a lot of the clumps in the areas where there was air pockets or air being held. And so now I'm going to really soak it down. And if I keep watering it, and I maybe till it again towards the end of summer, I think we'll have a usable product in the spring. It's pretty amazing how fast stuff breaks down if it's already been kind of moldering and sitting for a while, because it's all impregnated with all the bacteria and fungus that it needs to break it down. It just hasn't had the right environmental setting, which I'm now providing for it, which is that finer material and also water. Now, as you can see, it's really bright here. This is in the south exposure. So for me to get this pile really composting well, I should probably cover it with something. If I was doing this in my backyard, I would put a mesh cargo tarp over it, because then the moisture can still get to it, but it's gonna keep a lot of the light from penetrating in there, or some kind of a covering. But of course, if you cover it with something that is impermeable to water, you're going to prevent rainfall from getting into your pile as well. So you don't really want to do that unless you're somewhere where it rains more than you need, like out on the west coast. People would cover their piles out there from the rain. Here we kind of want to keep it. I'll just turn it again in the fall. It's really nice stuff. In the spring, they usually blend it with topsoil to bring the nutrient level down to where it should be. It adds both the nutrients of compost to your soil, but also adds the moisture holding capabilities. Compost will keep moisture in your soil because it's got that kind of wicking ability of like a sponge. Another thing it's good for is if you get salination or salt damage from people salting their walk paths and such in the spring. If you add a lot of topsoil to areas around the base of trees or gardens that have exposure to saline or salt. Compost helps to absorb extra salt and helps plants buffer their pH too. So they have everything they need to kind of get their pH in the right spot so they can absorb nutrients properly. So compost is a bit of a cure-all for a lot of stuff. There's always times when you might need something a little bit more specific for a specific pest problem or something. But another thing you can do with compost, whether you make it yourself or you get it from the cities, you can make compost tea. And there's a lot of information online about how to do that. It's really simple. You take finished compost such as this, put it in some kind of a cheesecloth tea bag in a container full of dechlorinated water with a bubbler in it and a quantity of unsulfured molasses. I'm sure there's some other things you could put in for kind of that shot of the sugars that the microbes need, but what you end up with is a super microbe-rich beneficial bacteria compost tea that you can spray onto your plant's foliage, and they'll absorb nutrients, and the microbes will actually protect the plant leaves, stems, and root systems from parasitic organisms and other kinds of like abiotic stressors, like nutrient deficiencies and stuff like that. So compost tea is one really cool thing to check out online. I'm sure Master Composters has something online for that, and the Compost Education Center of Manitoba, I think. The Green Action Center will have information about compost tea. And also worm composting. So if backyard big pile or small pile composting isn't an option for you, you can try vermicomposting. And there's some aficionados in Brandon that can help direct you to the red wriggler worms you need for that. And beyond that, I think save your materials. Try to keep your yard, your yard and your garden experiencing a closed circuit. So hold on to your lawn clippings. They have tons of nitrogen. Hold on to your leaves. They got lots of carbon. You can blend the two together and make pretty much all the soil amendments you need within your yard, and then you're not putting stuff in bags and taking it to the dump. But just want to thank the City of Brandon for making such a nice composting product and making it available to Brandonites and to community gardens. It's such an asset to have this. And after having just tilled the community garden compost, I can only appreciate how hard it is to make a product that's so clean, because the garbage finds its way into everything, and what comes out of the city, like you're hard pressed to find something bigger than that. That's a foreign object, little piece of garbage bag. It's really clean product. So thanks, Brandon.
So now that we have the finished product, can you show us what do we do with it? How do we put it on our garden?
Sure. Well, you can see right here some of these weeds here doing pretty good. We got some lamb's quarter. Look at that. Leafy vegetation. Perfect. Lamb's quarter is one of the real edible weeds that grows around here. Make sure you get a positive ID before you snack on nature. But it's got this little frosted look to it. I believe it's in the quinoa family. Amaranth family, and you can just munch them before they get big. They're kind of like spinach. This garden here has been well amended with compost. It is possible to give your plants a little bit too much compost. And some of the things you'll want to look for are similar to like too much nutrients and not enough nutrients tend to look the same. So just watch out for any leaves that are yellowing a lot after you've added compost, like these chives look a little bit yellow, and it might just be because they were partially buried before and the gardener maybe moved them. But that yellowing is a sign that the chlorophyll isn't being produced properly, either because there isn't enough nitrogen or maybe there's too much. In this case, the sunflowers are making very good use of it and demonstrating their phototropism as they follow the sun. So these plants will just be bending kind of like this all day. You get really green leafy material with a lot of nitrogen. So balanced compost is kind of what you want, with enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the compost that comes out of the city is generally a pretty good ratio of that, so that you get your leafy greens and you also get your fruits and root development as well.
So do you sprinkle it on top, Blake, or do you?
Yeah, we tend to encourage people to top dress, where you're putting it on top and incorporating it into the top couple layers of soil.
Okay.
That's where most of the feeder roots are going to be, and then of course it's going to leach nutrients down from that into the rest of the soil profile. Here's a garden that wasn't top dressed with compost, and you can see how the clay in the soil is causing it to crack. It's unlikely that it would be cracking like this if it was top dressed with compost. And the reason being that compost holds that moisture saving ability and that spongy flexibility, so that even when moisture is gone, the air spaces are held by the compost. Whereas just in clay, the clay expands when it's got water in it, and it contracts when the water leaves, and you get cracks and fissures. When we first had this garden, we'd have cracks in some of these beds so big you could put your fist in them from just having so much clay. So yeah, we'll take a little wander down here. A lot of these are just getting going. A lot of people grow greens in this garden. We got a real nice medley of different gardeners growing different things. And it's a little bit early to get the full excitement of the community garden, because of course stuff takes a while to pop out of the ground, but it's all coming together, and a lot of it's, well, all of the nutrients in this garden, save for what people smuggle in, people can certainly bring their own nutrients to the garden, but we really like to try to keep it organic. But it's all basically made possible by the City of Brandon's donations.
Hello, as Melanie introduced earlier, I am Justine. I am a programmer with the City of Brandon Parks and Recreation Department. Currently, I am at Westridge, 32 Willowdale Crescent. The community center has graciously offered to be a pickup site for free compost and mulch for anyone who views this video. So if you see behind me, we have a pile of compost and a pile of mulch. So if you see those two signs, you know you're in the right place. Please bring your own containers, as well as no truck fills. Please don't back your truck up onto our grass. We want to maintain the space and make sure there's enough supplies for everyone. So first come, first serve while supplies last. Thank you guys, new and old gardeners. We look forward to seeing what you produce, and we hope you have a great gardening season.